Okay, first I just want to share a story that I read of, you may have heard of Kristen Neff. She's an American psychologist and also a meditator. And she wrote a book called Self-Compassion. She did 10 years, she spent 10 years doing research on self-compassion, she and some colleagues. So the book contains the results of her research, but it also contains her own story, lots of stories from her life, so it's really, really interesting to read. But there was one incident, she has a child, as far as I know, only one child, and when the child was still quite young, 2-3 years old, he was diagnosed as autistic, which was, of course, very devastating. But she told the story of one time she was on an airplane flying to London, from America to London. That's a long trip. And her child was with her. And at some point he just started screaming, which was typical of autistic children, you know, and it's not because he's hungry or tired, it's just, you know, his nature, screaming. And she could see the other passengers looking at her like, you know, can't you do something about your child? What's wrong with you? You know, like it was her responsibility or her fault. And so it's a really, and you're on an airplane, you can't get off, you know. So anyway, it was a really challenging situation. And she said that was a time to practice self-compassion, to have compassion for herself, you know, and not blame herself, because like you say, you can feel guilty in that kind of situation. I'm not a good mother, I'm not doing enough, especially if people are actually looking at you and, you know, pointing their, you know, fingers at you mentally. Anyway, so that's a wonderful book, by the way, if anyone feels the need for more information on compassion, and particularly self-compassion. Sometimes it's easier to have compassion for other people than for oneself. So, and she has a website too, just called selfcompassion.org. So look it up. Well, I guess what I had in mind when I asked you to discuss this was I wasn't thinking so much about how calm abiding helps with kindness, but the other way around. But I think they both work. So what I had in mind was that if we try to practice meditation, whether it's mindfulness or calm abiding or any kind of meditation practice that we may do, if we are lacking in or deficient in kindness, loving kindness, then that could be an obstacle. I know from my own experience. For example, there's noise. Things happen. People make noise, birds make noise, animals make noise. Yeah, and if your kindness and compassion are deficient, then it's easy to get angry, annoyed, very annoyed. You can even start having fantasies, you know, about doing something violent. Has anyone ever had that? Right? Okay. So, on the other hand, if we have strong kindness, if our kindness is strong, then it's less likely that would happen. We'd hear some human being or other kind of being making noise, and we'd be able to just, that's happening, but not get angry, not get caught up in anger about it. Because anger is one of the hindrances, one of the obstacles to concentration. In case you haven't noticed, you know, if you're, it can happen. And not only because of things happening in the immediate sense, but also memories. Memories can come up of incidents that happened, you know, in the past, yesterday, last week, last month, when you were 5 years old. You know, things can come up in your mind, and they do come up. The more you meditate, the more stuff comes up. The more your mind just kind of opens up, and all the contents are just there. So, so memories can come up of previous experiences that were painful. And maybe you didn't even realize how bad it was at the time. But then when it comes up in meditation, it's like, wow. Your mind can just get so caught up in anger. Yeah, so, I mean, this is natural, and it's not something we should feel bad about, beat ourselves up about. It's just natural. But loving kindness is an antidote to anger. So the more we can have loving kindness, the stronger is our loving kindness, the more we'll be able to handle such experiences and cool down the anger, and even, if possible, not always possible, but sometimes possible, to replace the anger with loving kindness, to be able to feel kindness and compassion for that person or being instead of anger. Just to give an example, because I have a lot of anger. So one time I was doing a retreat in Spain. We have this wonderful retreat center in the south of Spain. It's relatively quiet, really quiet. It's up on the side of a mountain, really beautiful and quiet and so on. But sometimes there's just noise. And one source of noise is on the other side of the mountain, there's another mountain, and there's a road linking several villages. And there's cars and trucks and so on going up and down the road. The cars aren't such a problem. Trucks are a little noisy, but the motorcycles are so noisy. Yeah? And I think sometimes people tinker with the motorcycles to make them even more noisy. Is that correct? Yeah, they want to make as much noise as possible. So anyway, even though it's far away, you know, and the motorcycle only looks like this big, you can hardly see it. But because of the, you know, it's like a valley in between, just the noise carries. So I'd be sitting there, you know, trying to meditate, trying to concentrate, and there's this, and it goes on for a long time because the road is going up, then it turns and goes up, and so it's going, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 minutes of this noise. And in the beginning, I was just getting so annoyed with this, and why can't they go somewhere else? Why do they have to do this while I'm trying to meditate? All this kind of stuff. And then I realized how useless that was, you know, just totally useless to get angry, just making things worse, not making things better. So I found a solution. When I heard the motorcycles going up, I would just think, oh, I hope they're having a good time. I hope they're enjoying themselves. I hope they don't have an accident. I hope they reach their destination safely, and this kind of thing. You know, I had to force myself to think that way, but it was so much nicer. I mean, it was just such a nicer experience than the anger, the annoyance. Does that make sense? So that's just an example of how you can use loving kindness, which means wishing happiness for others, wishing others to have happiness. You can use that as an antidote to anger or irritation or annoyance that comes up in your meditation. If you hear a dog barking or kids playing or birds singing or whatever, you know, instead of being annoyed with them, you can think, oh, may they be happy. May they have a good time. Yeah. May they go away and do happiness somewhere else. But they will eventually. That's the thing, you know. It's like you said, it's not going to last forever. It may go on for a while, but eventually the bird goes away, the kids go away, the dog stops barking. So if you just have some patience and remember permanence, then these are some things that can help. And just try to have a kind heart, a kind attitude towards those beings. But that doesn't mean that if, you know, somebody is annoying us, it's always appropriate to be passive and do nothing. Okay, so there could be circumstances where we may feel that it's more appropriate to say something, do something, ask them to, you know, go somewhere else or whatever. So this is something we can decide, okay? But it's always good, like if you can, like I couldn't do anything about those motorcycles. I couldn't stop them. They're miles away. So I couldn't do anything to stop it, but I could at least do something with my mind to, you know, not let myself get annoyed and upset about it. And I mentioned this teacher, Ajahn Brahm, who he himself has done a lot of meditation, and he also leads retreats, guiding people in meditation. And he made the comment that he notices that people who are naturally kind. And some people just have more kindness. They're just really, really kind and sweet. That kind of person does better in meditation.
In life.
Huh?
They do better in life.
They do better in life, of course. yeah, of course. But of course that doesn't mean, okay, someone like me who has a lot of anger, that I can't change. We can change. That's the beauty. That's the wonderful thing. We all have loving kindness. We all have our moments. Like you say, when the baby's asleep, you know, the cute little puppy, you know, he's just down there playing before he starts peeing on the carpet or whatever. You know, so we do have moments when we feel a loving kindness. So it's a question of tapping into that, getting in touch with that feeling, with that energy, and then kind of nourishing it, like, you know, giving it more energy, more attention, so it grows more and more and more and more. And then we can feel it more often for more people, more beings, more situations. So we can grow it, we can cultivate it, we can increase it. I know, it's definitely possible. I've done it. I'm much more kind than I used to be. But, yeah, anyway, so I think that's really true, that the more kindness, loving kindness we can have, the more successful we will be in our meditation. Because for one thing, anger, irritation, the opposite states of mind to loving kindness, if they come up in our meditation, it's a disaster. I mean, I don't mean it's a disaster in the sense that you've lost it, because you can use that anger in your meditation. You can look at the anger, work with the anger. I'm going to talk about that later, how we can work with difficult emotions. But in a sense of trying to develop calm abiding, trying to develop concentration, you know, your mind is caught up in angry thoughts, angry feelings, very, very hard to concentrate. So I was thinking more in how loving kindness helps with concentration, calm abiding. But I hadn't thought about the other way around, but I think that works too, because if you do have a regular practice of meditation, whether it's calm abiding or mindfulness or whatever kind of meditation practice, you're naturally becoming more familiar with your mind. You're knowing your own mind better. And you start to be able to notice things happening in your mind more quickly. Because like anger, for example, you know, anger starts off maybe like a little spark. Like what happens in the forest sometimes, you know, there's just this little spark from a fire or a cigarette or whatever. Tiny, tiny, tiny little spark. But you know, that lands on some dry grass. And pretty soon it's a fire, and pretty soon, you know, the whole forest is burning. So it's similar with anger. It starts off very small, a little spark. But then, if we don't know how to douse it, how to deal with it, pretty soon it's a volcano. So with meditation, practice meditation, you become more aware of your mind, and you get to where you can notice the spark when it's still small. It's just starting to grow. And you can deal with it then. But if you don't notice it early on and do something about it, and you only realize you're angry when you're already shouting and breaking things, it's much harder. Does that make sense? So I think that's why meditation helps with loving kindness. It can help us to notice when we're losing our loving kindness and going into anger, and do something about that before it goes too far. Does that make sense? I mean, it takes time, what I'm talking about. You know, you can't expect it to happen immediately, but slowly over time. And just to give an example or a story of that, a woman I met in Russia, actually, she said before she started meditating, she would get angry, and she didn't realize that she got angry until a few weeks later, a few weeks after. And she'd realize, oh, I got angry. And then she started meditating. And after a while, she could realize it maybe 1 week later, and then 2 days later, and then 1 day later, and then 1 hour. So the amount of time it took her to realize her anger was decreasing. And then eventually she got to the point where she could realize it while it was happening. And then eventually the point where you can start to see it coming, when it's just starting to grow, starting to build up. And that's the best thing, when you can actually see it starting in your mind. I mean, it takes a while, of course, to get to that point, but when you can just see it starting to come up in your mind, you're in a better position to do something about it. Does that make sense? So this is why the practice of meditation, the practice of mindfulness is helpful. And another story, a woman who had a one-year-old child, and she'd learned the mindfulness meditation, the Vipassana meditation. And she said she noticed, she wasn't even trying to be less angry. She wasn't trying to work on her anger, but just practicing meditation regularly, she noticed that she wasn't getting angry as much as she used to. She was able to stay more calm in situations where previously she would have blown up, she would have exploded. So it can help you to just naturally stay in a more calm state of mind. And then even if something happens, you're able to notice it, let it happen, not react so much. Does that make sense? I don't know. Like I say, I'm not a parent, so I can imagine that would be very challenging. But I've also observed parents dealing with small children and seemingly able to stay calm and patient even if the kid's crying, whatever problems are happening. But I do think what you said about self-compassion is really important, because sometimes part of the problem is, we're angry at ourselves. Angry at ourselves that we're not the person we want to be. We're not reacting the way we want to react. And so then there's anger at oneself. There's anger at the situation, maybe anger at the child, but also at yourself. So it just escalates. So very important to have self-compassion, kindness to oneself, patience with oneself. Although that too takes time. Not something you can have immediately. Is that helpful? So anyway, it seems that it works both ways. Loving kindness can help with meditation. Meditation can help with loving kindness. So they help each other, assist each other.
We're trying to see the influence of loving kindness on shamatha, but not during the session. Of course, it helps to feel loving kindness during the session and deal with the obstacles. And we were told...
Wait a minute, you said not during the session. What do you mean? You shouldn't, you think you should...
No. We were trying to look for the influence of loving kindness on shamatha, but not having loving kindness during the session. But
at other times.
We were taught that any object can be object of shamatha, but it should be a stable object, not in motion. Because
emotion,
it should be stable object, like not in moving, because we want to stabilize the mind. Now we were thinking about the example you gave us about the woman who found it difficult to meditate on shamatha, but she meditated happily on loving kindness for 4 hours. So surely she stabilized her mind. She had quite a nice degree of concentration for 4 hours meditating on loving kindness, enjoying it. And the symptoms of having shamatha, like physical flexibility, I don't know about mental flexibility, and she enjoyed it, and she was... Can we reach shamatha by choosing this object, like that lady, continue all the way to sitting water meditation? Or do we have to, at some point, in this life or next one, to move to to go back to Samatha and practice a more traditional object or stabilized object. Can that lady reach single-minded meditation with loving kindness?
Yeah, that's actually one of the objects recommended by the Buddha, loving kindness. However, I think I asked some teacher about that. How would you use loving kindness as an object? And it's not that you're like, the usual way we do meditation on loving kindness is to think of many different objects and then try to generate loving kindness for this one and that one and so on. In the Theravada tradition, they think of, all the beings in the west, all the beings in the east, all the beings above, all the beings below, all the male beings, all the female beings. They kind of go through all these different categories of beings and, send loving kindness to them. So that isn't the kind of loving kindness you use to develop shamatha, but rather you do that kind of meditation until you get the feeling of loving kindness, that state of mind of feeling loving kindness for all beings, not leaving out anybody, all beings, and then you stabilize on that. You hold that state of mind and focus on that, do karma binding on that. So don't ask me to explain how, because I've never tried that, because I don't even have that kind of loving kindness, because, it's hard. It takes a while to be able to feel loving kindness for every living being, including your president, your prime minister, your, generals, your labor minister, all these kind of people, right? So, not easy to have this kind of universal, immeasurable loving kindness. But as I understand it, that's how you would use. So what that lady was doing, I think, was more the, thinking of all the different beings and generating loving kindness for them. And I don't think she actually had shamatha. It was just that she could sit there for hours, and she didn't actually say 4 hours, I don't know how many hours. But anyway, she could sit there for a long time and just do that meditation and feel good, feel happy without pain. And what she had trouble with wasn't shamatha, it was vipassana meditation. And that is challenging, vipassana meditation, because it is kind of opening up your mind and letting whatever comes come, and it can be some pretty heavy, difficult stuff, emotional, physical, and so on. So anyway, the answer is yes, apparently you can develop shamatha using loving kindness, but it's just the feeling of loving kindness which you generate in your mind, and not, the actual thinking of all the beings. Does it make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. And as you were talking, I was thinking, sort of self-contradiction, that the object needs to be stable, because the breath isn't really stable, is it? The breath. If we're using the breath as the object of concentration, it's not like a fixed thing in a sense, because it's coming, going, coming. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's noisy, sometimes it's quiet. So it's an impermanent thing.
And the mind.
Hmm?
And the mind as an object is not permanent.
The mind?
As an object?
Yeah, both the object and the mind watching the object are impermanent. But I guess in a way it's stable in the sense that it's there, happening all the time, and by focusing on the breath, we're not allowing our mind to just roam everywhere and do anything. Okay? So in that sense it does stabilize the mind, focusing on the breath. And then I'd see this in the Tibetan tradition. I can't say for everybody, but it doesn't seem to be very common that people even try to use the breath as an object for karma binding. And in fact, to be honest, it seems there aren't many practitioners who even try to develop karma binding. That sounds shocking maybe, but Alan Wallace did some research, field research he called it. He went among Tibetan people in Tibet and also in India and just checked how many people are trying to practice calm abiding, trying to develop calm abiding. And he found very few, because many of them are doing other kinds of practices, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, highest yoga tantra. So there's so many possible practices you could do. So they tend to do those practices rather than calm abiding. And when the Dalai Lama heard about this, he said, this is wrong. You know, we should encourage people to practice calm abiding, develop calm abiding. It's essential. It's an essential part of the path. Although it is said that in Tantra, within the practice of Tantra, you do develop calm abiding, not using the breath, but using a deity, the deity that you're, yeah. So that is part of the path of Tantra, developing calm abiding, but with a different object. But anyway, Alan found there weren't many people who were just focusing on calm abiding itself. But then within that, how many would be using the breath as an object to develop calm abiding? My guess is very few, because they talk about using the Buddha image. They say that's a better image, that's a better object to use. So most people would probably use that. So why am I talking about this? Yeah, so I don't think you'll find many practitioners, Tibetan practitioners, who have any experience trying to meditate on the breath, using the breath to develop calm abiding. But in the Theravada tradition, many people are doing it. And like I mentioned yesterday, they say that after some time, when your concentration gets better, you have this mental image appearing in your mind, and they say it can look like some kind of shape made of light, very brilliant and beautiful and glowing. And so when that appears, it just appears spontaneously. You don't consciously, create it. It just appears. And when that appears, you focus on that and use that object. So that's probably more stable than the breath coming in and going out. Anyway, I'm
thinking about visualization. So when I said stable, I was thinking about visualization of an object. I agree that the breath and the mind, if this is the object, is not stable.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about visualization.
Yeah, but even visualization, if you try doing that.
I choose a stable object.
Yeah, but you try to make it stable, but does it stay stable? Does it stay stable?
Yeah.
My experience is it's very hard to keep it there. You can start off visualizing it and then suddenly you realize it's not there anymore. It's just blank, dark, it's gone. Then you have to build it up again, and then it goes. So whatever object you choose, you've got some challenges there, trying to keep it stable. So in one way, the breath is easy because you don't have to consciously visualize it. It's already there. It's there all the time, happening. You can forget about it, you can be distracted from it, but it's easy to come back to because it's there. It doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. Does that make sense? Although some people do say, I've heard this, they say that sometimes the mind gets really, really subtle and they don't feel the breath anymore. I haven't had that experience, but I'm not sure what's going on there and what that means. Anyway, any other questions or comments?
I have technical question first and then a request. It's regarding the breath and counting the breath. And in the first session we had with you this morning, I was trying, I think it started yesterday, to count the breath, and then I told myself, be humble, count only one breath. Start with really one. And with the one breath, I had a pain in my back. I thought I had a question to you, so I was busy with the question. I had a memory within the one breath.
Within one breath?
Within one breath. or two,
Yeah.
I'm taking long ones, okay? So the question is,